but I want to have faith in humans. Give me something to believe in. Earth below me, sky above me, fire within me. Brought to you by UPRN Network. I'm Trish Moe, and this is The Missing Piece. Good evening, listeners. I'm Trish. This is The Missing Piece, and we are broadcasting live from New Orleans 105.3 and United Public Radio Network. Welcome. It is Monday. I want to thank Carnation for sponsoring this hour, and of course, all of my listeners for showing up. We're running a little late tonight. A bunch of sirens too. There's always running late. Yes, everybody's getting used to that with me though. So I wanted to talk about, the network has had on so many amazing mediums in the last, forever. But especially in the last few months, we've had some amazing, I know, Chasing Prophecy. We had June Ahern on recently. Outer Realm had, and Bigfoot and the Bunny had Ellie Molina. There was, Church of Mavis had Jim Hunt. There's been so many. I had Uma Shankari on a few weeks ago. Our own Kathy Bilski, obviously. Ken Edwards was on my show as well. April Bussett from Horsefly. There's so many. You can go back and reference some of our past shows for all of the amazing talented mediums we've interviewed, and that's not what I wanted. So I don't want to address those things that have already been covered and how people answer direct questions, that our listeners maybe have called or messaged in about something pertaining to their own lives or someone they wanted to contact. What I wanted to discuss is how we do it. Not necessarily how, but the different types and kind of the history. And what's amazing to me is the fact that there's so many skeptics to the very existence of spirits, but most people agree that people have a spirit or a soul, because that has been documented since the beginning of time in almost every single civilization known to man. Every single religion, every holy book across the globe, there has been some documentation of the presence of spirits and a soul existing. So most people can believe in that, but it's hard for a lot of people to believe that, for whatever reason, that can manifest or even have an intelligent presence, I guess, in our lives. So I kind of wanted to go over that. So there's a few things that is, as humans, we kind of argue. So first, the person or being who we often think about it in this matter, the person or being who thinks in us during life do we stop thinking after we die? That's kind of illogical, we just go to nothingness. Okay. A lot of people have that belief, and that's fine. But the ones that don't, so say you have your own personality, you have your own intelligence in this life. When you die, that's not just going to go away. A spirit's still going to have the same lessons, the same knowledge, the same personality they have in the spirit world outside of their body as they do in life. So that's where we get a lot of different, there's good and bad spirits. Because if a person's a bad person in life on earth, then there's a good chance, because that comes down to their soul. And so a bad person in this world is also going to be a bad person, good chance, in the spirit world. And so, and now with that in mind, a third illogical thought, if that person thinks of those, if you love people in this life and you're close to people in this life, your kids, relatives, whatever, friends, why would you stop having an interest in them after you're dead, or after your spirit is not in this shell of a body? That's kind of also illogical. So then to think that you can be present in the same place as a person, your loved ones, then why would you think that you can't communicate with them? So there's so many different levels of it. It's an interesting concept because we don't think of them as actual beings or people that existed before. So another thing, we talk about paranormal investigators, mediums, anyone who go to haunted locations and things like this. And it's very arrogant of us, I think, and almost illogical of us to think that spirits are very free. They are not confined to a body or this human shell. So they don't have to obey our commands or prove anything. They don't have to submit to investigation many times. And that's the danger when you get into things like that. When people go to these haunted locations and such, many times the spirits there are very low vibration spirits. And the ones that do mimic demons or children or whatever, or that do succumb to our investigations of moving things or doing what we say or whatever, they do that out of their amusement. It's fun to them to have that power over humans and to be able to kind of mess with our minds. It's very narcissistic. And so you'll get multiple, different types of mediums. There's the ones that specifically do that kind of work, but usually for a purpose. As far as myself goes, I have a very, I studied criminal justice for a very long time and psychology, as well as history. So I'm a historical medium. So I kind of think of spirits. I approach it with more of a forensic background, as working with cold cases, trying to, I go to places that I'm drawn to kind of look back at the historical facts. And many times they're trying to bring my attention to something that was inaccurate in our history, in written books, in cases of tragedies, murders, rapes, things like that. I'm drawn to a lot of those because, especially if the victim was never, their case was never solved or there was no justice. So for instance, when this first happened, so I'll back up. When I was little, I encountered many spirits everywhere, because everything has a spirit, which most people don't think. Plants have a spirit, animals, everything in this world has a spirit. And so they're able to exhibit emotion and things like that. And when I would encounter these spirits in my house and, tell my parents and everything, and they didn't believe me, nobody believed me, I didn't realize. So I kind of realized it after a while, but there were certain ones that were just passing through. There were certain ones that were interdimensional beings, your ETs and things like that. There were others that were always there and have always been there in my life. And so that's what we like to call our spirit guides. Now, the first time, I guess, I had the experience, I lived in all these haunted locations. I could see them. I never once paid attention to messages of any kind, put any correlation together. I just thought, like anyone, like investigators and such, that I could see ghosts. Okay, well, for what purpose? I never questioned that because I was afraid of it. So then it got to where I would hear auditory spirit messages. So that's a different type, meaning a physical manifestation of a spirit trying to communicate. That can be any type of tapping, knocking, things like that. So that was probably in the last 10 years I started putting that together. And then it got to where there's automatic writing. So there's direct writing or automatic, which is directly through a medium. And it's actually called, pneumatography, I believe. But that's actually writing. Now, spirits can also communicate writing on their own through a manner of like printers and things like that. It's totally different. When they're writing, automatic writing through a medium is when a person goes into an almost trance-like state and starts writing what a spirit that is coming through is giving them the message. Now, a lot of times that could, people have written books, poetry, things like that, and that has been directly influenced, music that has been directly influenced by spirit. And spirit could be, it could be an actual spirit, it could be someone of the past, it could be a famous composer, it could be extraterrestrials communicating a message through their writing. Now, what I found interesting, here's the thing with mediums. A person, whatever is communicating through a person, does not necessarily have to be deceased, which makes it even more interesting. So then you get into channeling and remote viewing and things like that. Back to the writing. When a person goes into this trance-like state, very often the handwriting looks nothing like their own, and the figure of speech or the manner, the dialect is not necessarily their own. So there's mediums that have written in other languages, in completely opposite, say they're normally right-handed, they write left, things like that. And so in my own life, this has happened numerous times where I will go back in a journal or something, and it's clearly apparent that all of a sudden, there's a difference in the writing manner. There's a difference in, instead of going left to right, maybe I went right to left. Maybe I went from cursive to print. and it was in a language that I not necessarily a language that I don't speak, but the verbiage was not of my own. Now, when I go back to saying not all spirit communication is from the deceased, there has been times that, okay, for instance, I was working with my sister one time, and we'd been writing things down, and I literally just being in close proximity to her energy, or maybe even her thought process. When you're on the same frequency as another person, you can often start transferring thoughts and things like that. It's telepathic communication. But this came across in my handwriting. So I was unconsciously, there's your conscious decisions and unconscious decisions. I was not purposely doing this. I started writing exactly like her. I don't do that on a normal basis, obviously. I've never done that. But it was interesting that we were in the same space in close proximity, and I started writing like her. Because I did it by accident. I literally picked something up, and I thought it was her handwriting, and it was not. She said I wrote that. So now pneumontophony, I believe that's how you say that. I don't know. It's kind of a really ancient word. Is where spirits produce noise. Here's my thing with that. When you're talking about mediums and public seances, public investigations, things like this, I've always tell people to be careful, because again, if you're asking spirits to do something specific, if you're saying, which happens a lot just because we always want confirmation of stuff, but if you're saying move this ball and there's 15 people in the room, then you don't really, and the ball moves. How can you prove that it is coming from a spirit and not the manifestation and energy of all the people in the room? Because if you're saying move this ball and there's 15 people thinking that the ball is going to move, and it could be the people's energy causing that reaction rather than any outside source. So that's something that I always tell investigators as well. But another that also goes back to, unless you're dealing specifically with a child, a lower vibration spirit, and a lot of mediums will absolutely not deal with lower vibration spirits, because what happens when you're dealing with lower vibration spirits, you literally, as mediums, to protect ourselves, we tend to try to keep our vibration very high, so we're not affected by the negativity. We do not become overpowered, because a lot of the lower level ones find amusement in even possession, things like that, manipulation of the living, all of that. And so in order to communicate with the lower level spirits, we actually have to lower our vibration as well to kind of be on that level to communicate with them. Now, sometimes this is beneficial only if you're going to receive something as an outcome, say an answer to a cold case investigation, or something in science that might help be of use in the present moment. So that's something to keep in mind. The same with Ouija boards, things like that. the energy of the human mind is capable of so many things that you don't know whether that could be, in hypnotherapy, they teach us using pendulums and Ouija boards and things like that. They teach us that that's actually our subconscious or higher conscious mind moving and giving us those messages. So you never know if it's coming from the living in your environment, the medium, or an actual spirit. So that has to be discerned. Now, there's so many. As far as the living often manifests in other people's environments more often than actual deceased people. And let me explain that. So, remote viewing, for instance. The first time I did this completely unaware. My daughter was being bullied at school, and our energy is very closely related. I mean, we're very close. So, and as with any mom, of course you get defensive and you get to where you want to be able to protect your children and things like that. She was being bullied at school, and so the next day she came home. She went to school. She came home and she said she ran in the door. This was probably kindergarten, first grade. She ran in the door saying, "Mommy went to school with me today." And I'm like, that's weird. What? So what happened, probably as an overprotective mother mechanism and defense mechanism, when someone's hurting our children or we think they are or whatever, I subconsciously remote viewed through her while she was at school. Now, most people would say that's impossible. No, this has been a thing. People have been remote viewing and channeling, and that's probably since the beginning of time as well. So there's a difference. Also, I can tell, especially after hypnotherapy training and things like that, when someone is trying to remote view through me or trying to access my mind as well. And a lot of times people aren't aware they're doing that. It happens when someone, if someone's thinking about you, they literally send, it's like old school. It reminds me of old school telegraphs or telegrams. A message is sent across the universe. You could be halfway across the world for that matter. And it sends out a signal, and you literally, it goes to that other person. So that happens when you think of somebody, all of a sudden someone you haven't seen or heard from pops up in your mind and they call you a few seconds later, or things like that. It's when you get on the same frequency and that person enters your energy. Now, when someone is remote viewing through me, I've noticed, and you have to be very careful who you purposely and intentionally share your energy with, because that makes an energetic imprint on you for the rest of forever, unless you can consciously separate yourself from that. So anyone you've ever worked with, any friends, any relationships, things like that, this is why those things keep coming back up. Because even if a person is talking about you, if they are thinking about you in a negative way, if they're thinking about you in a positive way, energy is so effective that it affects that person. So if a person is trying to remote view through me, I see them, depending on what they're doing, almost like it's a transparent object almost, or person, or whatever's in front of them, or because it works both ways. It's like two neighbors in a house next to each other looking into each other's windows. That's how remote viewing works. So it presents itself in my atmosphere. When you see in movies, like a person was just made of water, so almost like a translucent, transparent form of. And that's how I know that the difference between, which makes sense because people are water, so basically almost completely water. That's how I know that it's the living, it's a living spirit rather than a deceased one. And so another, one of the first times that, which I've still got to do, I have to do research on and visit the exact location, because there's two other types. There's mediums that use energy from objects to receive messages, meaning I can go to a location, or I can get an object, say it's an antique or a piece of clothing or something with a specific energy. If you're looking for a missing person, say, or you're trying to figure out who that object belonged to, you can touch it and see the history. It's almost as if everything leaves. If you think of everything in the universe as a computer, everything leaves cookies. Everything leaves breadcrumbs. Everything has a history folder file. And so you start from there. That's your target. That's what it's called in any channeling, remote viewing, mediumship. You have a target, whether that be a person, if you have a relative that's been deceased, if you have a missing person, if you have, again, like I said, that person does not have to be deceased. Say you're trying to find someone. That energy goes out. It's a little ping, a little spark in the universe. And that's where you start. So you start at this target and expand from there. Much like forensics. In forensics, they start at the scene of the crime. That's their target. And they go from there. They look for evidence around that. So oftentimes, everything in the universe, as far as that goes, when you're dealing with actual forensics and investigation, in like police investigations or paranormal, whatever, everything will conspire to help a medium who has good intent, meaning not for amusement, not for the sake of ego or self promotion, things like that. When they have a medium that's trying to actually help the house, help the surroundings, help the environment, help nature, help the spirits who received some sort of injustice in life, when that's recognized, everything in the environment starts helping and aiding in that process, meaning the living and the dead and nature, animals, whatever. And that's how you start getting from one spark. It's like putting, when you have a light, and if you have a floodlight, that creates pieces of its fragments, and it's chaotic, and that's just spread everywhere. And so you can't do that. So when you focus on one thing initially, it's like putting a flashlight in a tube. And that makes it a much easier process, almost of elimination, to either go back in time or back through evidence or whatever the case may be, back through someone's health records. Hi, Jeff. That's the only chat room I can see right now. So, but when you do that, it that's how the process starts, and then it's almost like law of attraction. You start bringing in different messengers, and one ping leads to so many others, and so that's how I often investigate places, because one leads to another one, and then another one leads to, and somehow they're interconnected in either the nature of how the place worked, whether it be a hospital, asylum, war battlegrounds, things like that. And there is always a message that can help us in the future. And so that's very important as well. Back to the first time, and I wasn't even consciously aware that I was capable or that this was happening. I had a dream about some little girls, had no idea who they were. Woke up, drew a complete map, actually, of something, a location. Then I started getting manifestations of messages in my actual reality, my 3-dimensional reality of these locations. And so for instance, I got very vivid pictures of these girls in my head. I woke up in the morning, was getting ready. I had just bought some brand of hair detangler or something. And these girls had been in my dream. This specific hair detangler or whatever had one of these days, I'll make a presentation, I took pictures of all of these little messages, had dream something magic on it. I had never bought that brand before. It had a little girl on it who looked almost exactly like the one in my dream. And I thought, okay, well, that's just a coincidence. And then that day, I went somewhere. It was during the shutdown, so there weren't any cars anywhere. I found these weird antique teacups that a lady sold me online. I went to her shop, which wasn't open to the public, but she was meeting me there just for these antiques. And they were little cherubs. And in her store, I walked right to a specific book, and it said, it was something about what girls learn at summer camp. And then when I walked out to the street, there was just one truck sitting there, and it was an old, like a 1976, 70 something Chevrolet, and it said something about Fort Scott, and I'm like, that's just coincidence. There's a Fort Scott, Kansas, so whatever. Maybe that's, thought nothing of it. Went home, but that was the only truck on the entire street, besides my vehicle, that was parked there, and it pulled up, when I went inside or whatever. Because again, this was during the shutdown. Everything was like a ghost town, and so when I came home that night, I don't watch TV ever really, very rarely. And so I was doing something in my office. My TV came on, and there was a documentary, and it was about the Fort Scott Girl Scout murders of 1970 something. And all of a sudden, these girls' pictures started flashing across the TV, and they were the exact girls in my dreams. So I looked up the map. It matched what was at that campsite. Now, here's the thing about this. I had never heard of this case in my entire life. I had never seen anything about it. I was completely unaware that it ever happened. I wasn't even born when it happened. So, and there were physical messages in my life that very day that all kept coming back to the same thing. And that's the thing with why mediums always have such a, especially when it comes to forensics or messages about danger, things like that. Because if we don't get that message out there, if we don't solve that case, if we don't, I guess, do what those spirits are kind of trying to ask us to do, it doesn't stop. And it manifests itself in our bodies physically as illnesses. So there's so many. I see people. There's a lot of times that I can look at a person and know that they're going to die soon because their aura looks differently. And usually it happens very quickly after that. You know, it's usually I'll see someone and get a weird vibration, I guess. And then all of a sudden the next day I see that they were in a car accident or something happened. And it's something that has happened more since I had a few near-death experiences. But again, the ability to see spirits has been present my entire life. I just didn't understand what I was seeing. So I think there's so much more to learn and to discover as far as the world of spirits. So I think that's a complete other show, but we are out of time tonight. And I want to thank everyone for listening and joining us. We will, I have Patty Negri on next week, and she's infamous as far as her mediumship. So please join us. Thank you for listening, and good night.